Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today I'm delighted to host the second session that is focused on the EU AI Act, a very important upcoming legislation, important for not only financial services, but every business, because it is going to shape what is possible and what is not. And I have with us an expert in this area, Michael Borelli, who is a director at AI and Partners and absolutely focused 24/7 on this topic. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Effie, it's good to see you again. Thank you for having us back, and it's an honor to be part of the update on our last one. And indeed, there's a lot of stuff in AI governance, so always keeps one challenged.
Before we start, I mean, obviously, why care is the basic question since the act is not yet live. But before we dive into that, do we have any news, any updates, any developments that have happened over the past month regarding the EU AI Act, or not everything is really where it was a month ago?
Well, I'm delighted to say we actually have a ton of developments. It has been phenomenal how active it's been. So the main ones are the General Purpose Code of Practice, which was due to be released in May, is now due for publication in early July, latest August. And we foresee that this will be pretty instrumental if it goes through. So these basically outlines the requirements. Forgive me for jumping straight in, by the way. These are the
Oh, no,
requirements.
we want to hear it.
The requirements for general purpose AI model providers, so people like Anthropic or OpenAI, and these provisions apply from August. So these are the guidelines they have to follow. So that's, and we've AI Partners has contributed every step of the way, and we've been an instrumental part of that process. And secondly, there's also a simplification agenda being considered by European Parliament. What this means is there are efforts to try and simplify, pause, or even delay the EU AI Act, and these are being considered, I believe, this week. There was a hearing 2 weeks ago, and the second hearing is this week. So we should have further updates for the audience after this. So it's interesting times, but all of our sources indicate that the EUA Act will still go ahead, but it will probably have some form of change, but no fundamental structural changes.
The last time we emphasized a lot that the spirit of the EU AI Act is around risk management, right? Has that changed? I mean, the sentiment that I was left from our previous discussion was that although details may change and will probably change, that core principle will not change.
The principles of risk management have not changed. So the regulation is still very much risk-based. It's the requirements that apply based on your risk level are being under discussion. So for example, transparency measures or the requirements for high-risk systems are being discussed, but the fundamental criteria of which risk levels haven't changed. That being said, the general purpose AI models, there are certain discussions ongoing as to whether the threshold will change. At the moment, it's a threshold called 10 to the power of 25 flops, floating point operations, which is a measure of computational power. And there are discussions whether it could be increased to 10 to the power of 26 flops.
What does that mean? Explain to me as a non-techie. Although all of us are techies today and all of us are business people today, I don't know if we should continue that distinction. But what does that terminology, or what does that mean in practice?
It's the computational power used to train an AI model. So how powerful it is. So you have models like, for example, if it exceeds this threshold, by the way, it's deemed to pose a systemic risk to the fundamental rights of individuals. A good example of a model potentially exceeding this threshold is OpenAI. So I believe it has in excess of 200 million users in any given week, and the amount of computational power used or required for this is excessive. Whereas I believe there are certain innovations going on in Silicon Valley where they're called small small language models which don't exceed them but achieve the same results. So it's you're almost seeing, and forgive me if this is somewhat left field, you're almost seeing a manifestation of Moore's law in an AI context.
Okay, okay. So is it correct to assume that the spirit is we might not regulate or require, hold accountable the small language models, but after a certain size
Hmm.
measured by the computational power, then we have to be strict.
Absolutely. And the this is why the threshold is seen as a benchmark of compliance. And you'll there are some schools of thought that say people try and circumvent the rules if they go below this threshold, or indeed, let's say, fragment a large model into multiple smaller models, but in aggregate they would exceed the threshold. I think you've probably seen similar instances in commodity derivatives trading where you had threshold. If you had the aggregate position of a certain trade, it would exceed the threshold, but you fragment it so it doesn't exceed the threshold, and you could see a similar practice in this context.
Yes, I understand. You mentioned compliance, Michael. So under the EUA Act, this, I understand compliance has many dimensions, right? It
Hmm.
might be on the dimension of a computational power that we already mentioned, but it could be at other levels. It could be around data.
Hmm.
What does it really entail?
A fascinating question. What it entails is depending on the risk level of your system, that determines what you have to do and not do. If I give you a couple of examples, if it's a high risk system, so high risk in this context is a risk of high risk of harm, so physical, financial, psychological, emotional, to an individual's health, safety, and fundamental rights, you would have to do all of the following, and this is non-exhaustive. So you would have to put in place a quality management system. You would have to operate a risk management system which continuously monitors the risks 24/7, and any changes in the risk profile would have to be logged and dealt with accordingly. You would have to have data and data governance requirements. So you would have to potentially put in place controls over who has the data, when's the data updated, how's it logged, how often it's reviewed, and potentially having software to assist with this. You'd have to register that system with the high risk database monitored by the European Commission. And they do a similar thing for medical devices. So it's a public registry that anyone can query or inquire if they want to question the validity or credibility of a system. You would also have to do post-market monitoring. So what that means is after you deploy the system, you'd have to continuously monitor it to check for any irregularities or any changes in the risk profile. And a good example of that could be changes in your data. So if the data feeding that system is deemed to be high risk or potentially from healthcare use cases or involves vulnerable people, that will change the risk profile and that would need to be embedded and dealt with accordingly.
So, I mean, you make me feel I don't want to think about this. It's down the road. I want to kick the can down the road because this can create a whole can of worms of requirements that, to-do lists, architecturally, operationally, reporting, everything. So is this mainly the reason that businesses should start preparing? Especially the businesses that
Hmm.
are getting involved already with the advancements in AI? Or why would you say we should care before it's really, we know what exactly it's all about?
It's a great question, and we do get asked this a lot. So if we cast our minds back to GDPR when it entered into force in 2016 and then became fully applicable in 2018, what that meant is that business had a 2-year window to get all the policies, all the procedures, systems, controls in place. So it's almost like a grace period where they say, okay, we'll give you this time, you can ask as many questions, we'll give you as much help as possible. But then post 2018, they will expect everything to have already been done, and then they will take corrective action, and that's when fines will be levied. That's when strict enforcement action is happening. So if we fast forward to where we are today, we are in this sort of grace period or implementation period where companies are expected to put in place everything. So when it gets to August next year, it won't be a case of, okay, guys, it's 2nd of August 2026, we start today. It will be email on Monday morning, day one from compliance. What have you guys done? Can you give us evidence? And we want to see this. And if you can't give it, we're gonna take
Shut it down.
we're gonna take action against you. So, and we saw similar things with GDPR, where so the founder of AI Partners, Sean, noticed that towards the end of GDPR, companies did a mad sprint to get everything in place. Not only was that very costly and also quite inefficient, it was quite uncoordinated, and the majority of the costs involved were actually identifying and mapping AI systems. So from the perspective of what we're doing, it saves you time and effort to do it today, but because of the sheer volume of things you have to do and considerations, the earlier you start, the easier life's going to be.
And understood. So it is GDPR multiplied by, I don't know what the factor is, 10, 20, something
Yes,
like that.
exactly.
So are there some recommendations you could say where to start now, how to start, what is a good starting point? And is it mainly for the businesses that are adopting AI systems, or does any business have to consider this?
It's a great question. And we'd say the best place to start is always knowing how many systems you have. So I think we touched on the KYA last time.
Yes.
And I think that's where we'd always advise companies to start. So getting full visibility of all your systems, models, algorithms, or prompts, etc., in an inventory, getting them risk classified, and having those risk levels. So if you have 100 or if you're 1,000, etc., getting them all risk classified, and then giving it to the board as soon as possible, and then strategizing based on that. So the what to do next is a board level decision, because there's and then once they've taken that decision of which ones to keep, de-risk, or shut down, you can then start the implementation period. But until that full visibility is there, it's impossible to know what to do next. And as part of this also involves education work for the board. And our conversations with the executives, with they're very busy. They understand what's going on, so they just want that. They would like that information, actionable information, which they can then take and start the implementation journey.
Yeah, Michael, from the work that I have done and the research that I have done over the past 2 years after the publication of this chapter, Thinking Like an AI Native, in the Wiley book with the Fast Future Executive,
Mm,
one of the things that we identified there is that if businesses continue to implement AI in the usual department silos, like, okay, let's do AI in customer service, and then let's do some AI in compliance, and then
mm,
let's do some in marketing, and on and on, then you're not going to unlock the value and the intelligence that can be unlocked,
yes.
because it's really at that intersection, and by breaking those silos, using AI to break those silos. And I assume that you are seeing this in your work of advising how to start and mapping AI systems. Are you seeing this in the market where you have a business and they have AI systems siloed in marketing, AI systems that nobody in marketing knows about, and they're in customer service and they're in compliance, and they're really siloed? And
Oh, yes. I think in short answer, yes. So what we've started doing is we built an AI governance software that identifies how many systems you have by legal definition. And when we've done scans of an organization's cloud or internal infrastructures, we've seen that AI is prevalent across the entire organization, but no one knows where it is. I'll give you an example. Anyone who uses Microsoft Teams, there's actually a setting involved under your privacy settings called creative communications, and that's automatically enabled. And what that means is any data you put in, let's say Microsoft Word or Excel, is hosted in Azure, and models are being dropped into these data environments to train on. So instead, it's the reverse of what usually happens, where you put the data into a model, they're dumping AI models into the AI environment to train on them, but no one knows where they are and how many are using them. And every department is then using Microsoft Word applications differently. So our scans, so the scanner feature we have has identified this. And when we speak to companies, engage with them, they have no idea that features like this exist and where AI systems are actually hosted.
Okay, so it's like you have these little windows, doors in your house, in your building, and you don't know that these intruders have access, right?
Precisely.
Yeah, and I guess since there's such diversity and potential on how to use these tools, you need to somehow monitor this and understand how they are used and identify what are the permissible or non-permissible use cases.
Absolutely. If they have one high risk, excuse me, one unacceptable risk system, from the 2nd of February this year, they've been banned. So these are the ones that carry the highest fine of 35 million euros or 7% of global annual turnover, whichever's higher. And the enforcement regime actually starts on the 2nd of August this year. So what I foresee, but it's no means certain, is the period between February this year and August is when they're doing the information gathering phases, and then a few requests for information will be sent up by regulators on the 2nd of August. And that's the deadline where every EU member state will have had to notified all their competent authorities and regulators to the European Commission. So that's why the implementation period on face value, it seems as though nothing is going on. But the time the things that have to be done in this period of time, which you can either blissful ignorance and pretend nothing's happening, or actually crack on with it because there are certain milestones that will be reached. And the enforcement one is on the near horizon.
And all this will affect actually the use cases that are make it and are maintained and evolved from the ones that have gone in production, because the risk benefit analysis changes with this regulation, right?
It changes the very concept. I agree with you. It changes the very concept of risk itself, and the way, one, that they've conceptualized risk, but two, how it's managed. So the continuous risk assessment and the ongoing need to do ongoing assessments and have the infrastructure to support this is quite novel, and indeed it's quite overwhelming. I mean, if you look at an example of companies that have started this, Snowflake have actually acquired their ISO 42001 certification because they've seen what's happening and they want to be prepared for this. So
What
the
is
big
this ISO certification?
so ISO 42001 is the management system for AI systems.
Okay.
So it's the overarching infrastructure to help companies manage their AI risks. So systems, policies, controls. It hasn't yet been published in the official Journal of the European Union, so it's not yet harmonized. But the industry collectively has shown a strong, some with players like Snowflake acquiring this, it's pretty significant.
Okay, I think we could wrap up our conversation with this development that I was not aware of, and with the fact that we are awaiting in July these news that are really pertinent for the big infrastructure players, I guess.
Yes,
Is there nervousness around that? Is there a lot of uncertainty? How is the market?
I think the market has been the current thing I've seen a lot is they want legal certainty and they don't want regulation to stifle innovation. So
Yeah,
that is a big, but equally there are players who are desperate for guardrails, for
yeah.
regulatory assistance, and they want to be able to know that their businesses are going, the AI products are not going to be taken off the market. I have seen some big counter movements in the US towards pro-regulation, and European companies but it's not all in favor of regulation. There are some companies who think the EUA Act
Much.
just slow things down. So there are maybe some compromises, but we do see overall favorable sentiment towards it. But there's one more development which I think is worth mentioning, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So next week in the US, as part of President Trump's big beautiful bill, the Senate, I believe, will be considering a proposal to either a ban, or sorry, approve or reject a proposal to ban state AI regulation for 10 years. So if that gets approved by the Senate, that means any state will not be able to enact a state AI regulation for 10 years.
Oh, wow. So it has to be absolutely in the power of the at the federal level.
That is what is going on. And why it's in the globe, because the AI is a global issue, geopolitically and otherwise. If it gets approved, it will have massive knock-on consequences for the EU, for Japan, for Canada, you name it. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. So I think even in how the EU Act is enforced and indeed the market's perception towards it and the attitudes towards it will change based on what happens in the US. So I think a lot of people are holding their breath and they don't want to make any, massive moves, potentially even implementation efforts until there is some certainty
Clarity.
in this respect.
Is there a precedent of this type of bill? States are banned for a certain period or from the legislative power?
That's from what I've seen, this is unprecedented. It could be a case of not wanting to start for innovation, and there could be other means to do this, maybe incentivization mechanisms or certain, I guess, punishments, if for lack of a better word, if
Yep.
the companies misbehave. Nothing on this scale, though. It is quite extraordinary what's happening. But from an EU standpoint, how it's enforced and indeed the very rigor in which this is held, it is going to probably be questioned by the market. So we're keeping a close eye on this.
What is the philosophy of it? Where is this coming from?
Very much pro-innovation. So there is a very strong argument that regulation stifles innovation. But
Okay.
my conversations with civil society researchers and the traditionalists in Europe, they argue that traditional business bureaucracy is what stifles innovation, not AI regulation. If I give you an example, in some of the Baltic states, you can open and start a business in probably in less than a day, perhaps even 3 hours, where in some member states it takes you 3 weeks to open a bank account.
Correct.
So traditional business bureaucracy is probably more of an argument towards running up a business and driving or inhibiting regulation, as opposed to laws coming in for a technology which hasn't been regulated ever. So that's unprecedented in itself. So it almost seems a bit paradoxical to make arguments for stifling innovation if nothing's happened yet. It's generally a hypothesis until proven true or untrue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a very exciting and intense period. We can't be sleepwalking. There's a lot of development. This is just not an ordinary topic and a local topic. We know if this is a general purpose technology, geopolitics.
Mm.
It will determine the future of all economic, if you want, forces, clearly. I think there's no disagreement on that, right?
No, and but the use case, what is another interesting development, which I heard about this week, which is phenomenal, is that the very fact that it's general purpose, the fact that it's general purpose means that it's being used in circumstances not initially envisaged. So, for example, ChatGPT is being used as a proxy social media website and platform, which is now bringing it within scope of the Digital Market and Digital Services Act. And this is happening because of its general purpose nature. So it's almost becoming a victim of its own success. So the more instances and the different circumstances you use it means it brings it within scope of a whole different range of
How is it
regulation.
used as a social media platform?
So people are uploading images, people are talking with each other, people are rating different models and engaging, and they are putting a lot of online traffic is being pushed through those platforms.
Advertising?
And the monetization aspect has been much talked about. So yes, the advertising element on let's say user interfaces on general purpose
Yeah.
AI models, and if these And the same with the internet. If you think how, for example, Google, when it first started off as a search platform, the monetization via advertising is when a lot of commercial interest came in. And I think the move towards this is probably going to happen with large language models. And the reason that is so potent, but also where the prohibited practices come in, is they have the data, and if they stream advertisements to you. So, for example, if you use a certain platform and it
Yes,
knows.
I use Perplexity, and Perplexity it's discussed that they might start advertising.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they know your behavior and your characteristics, and the advert streamed to you will be tailored to your taste and requirements, and then how you respond to information.
Yes, yes. This is a fascinating topic. Thank you so much, Michael, and look forward to the developments and to our next talk, where we will have more clarity, and we will look back and look forward to these events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.